Awesome. Wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly, and I'm a program coordinator with Burlington Green. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this very special introduction to birding in Burlington and Hamilton with our guest speaker, Bob Bell. We're looking at this event to be about an hour long, maybe a little bit longer. We've got a lot that we're trying to cover. It is being recorded, so if you're not able to stay to the very end, we will send out a link to the recording so you can catch anything that you may have missed, so don't fret. Before we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. And this land acknowledgement relates to where Burlington Green does our work in Burlington, Ontario. But of course, we always encourage you to do your own land acknowledgement if you're calling or joining us from somewhere else. We respectfully acknowledge that our work with the community takes place within the bounds of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee peoples. This land is covered by Treaty 14, the Head of the Lake Treaty. We honor all the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who've been living on the land since time immemorial, and we recognize their leadership in sustaining Mother Earth. We have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions, land, waters, plants, animals, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. So thank you for joining our Zoom webinar tonight. We have a decent sized group today, so you'll see that your video and microphones have been disabled, but fear not, like you've already tested out, you can use the chat function to comment if you have anything you want to share. If you have any questions about birding or anything that Bob is going to be talking about, throw those into the Q&A. We're going to have a few minutes at the end where Bob is going to answer some of your questions, and we'll do as many as we can reasonably get through. So I also thought it'd be a little fun to start off with a little poll. First, just to find out what brought you here tonight. We know that Bob is a popular guy. Maybe you're here for Bob. that would be an answer for other, but maybe you're an avid birder. You're new, you want to learn more, you want to learn about the health benefits or how to protect them, all of the above. If you've answered other, feel free to answer in the chat what brought you here tonight. And we'll just give it a minute to let people respond. Almost everybody's got their vote through yet. And let's see what people said. Also, lots of avid birders out there. So we've got avid birders and new birders. Those are the predominant audience tonight. So it looks like we've got a great group and lots of good things to share. And then I thought we'd do one more poll. Now, for people who are, big birders, you're probably going to be unhappy with how few options you have. But I chose a few local birds that are, can be regularly seen here. And if you have a different favorite bird, share it in the chat. Let people know about some other cool birds, and maybe Bob will be sharing some of those tonight. And I'll just give people a moment to answer. Oh, already we have one person who loves eastern bluebirds. Those weren't on the list. All right. And let's see those results. Awesome. So that's interesting. It looks like blue jays are the popular choice on this. I was surprised. I thought cardinals were going to take it away, but they're all good ones. There's not a wrong choice there. All right, so I'm just about ready to pass things over to Bob, but again, let everyone know we're going to leave a few minutes for questions at the very end. So if anything comes up that you want to ask Bob about, throw it in the Q&A, and we'll cover as many as we can. And for those who maybe don't know Bob, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to him. Bob Bell spent 35 years as a mineral exploration geologist before retiring to Ancaster in 2015. He quickly discovered that the area with its multitude of habitats and environments was fantastic for birding. Bob is passionate about sharing the joy of birding with people of all skill levels and enjoys introducing them to the huge variety of beautiful birds that can be seen in the Hamilton and Burlington areas. He hopes that his passion will inspire viewers to take a new or increased interest in the sights and sounds of nature that surround us, and that this interest will translate into support for our efforts to have Burlington and Hamilton designated as bird-friendly cities. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Bob. So Bob, you can take over from here.
Thank you, Kelly, and bear with me while I get my my computer up. There we go. So thanks again, Kelly, and thank you, Burlington Green, for this this opportunity, and of course, thank you, audience, for attending and your interest in birds and allowing me to share my passion. I chose as the cover slide duck that I think is our most elegant duck, the northern pintail. That I took this photo at LaSalle Marina Park in Burlington, and that name will come up a lot because birding. So I warned Kelly, I can rabbit on about birds all night. So if I go too long and you've had enough, I will not be insulted if you sign off and leave early. So why am I so passionate about birding? Well, you know, as a geologist, I spent a lot of my career working outdoors, and this is just continuing that. You get the fresh air, you're soaking up nature. Someone that's dealing with a chronic illness, and we'll talk about that in a minute, you get exercise, which really pushes your body. It challenges my sense of observation. It could be that tiny little bird 50 or 60 feet up, and you're waiting to spot it come out into the open. It requires me to slow down and be a bit more patient, waiting for that bird to come out, or to get that perfect photo. I'm expanding my scientific knowledge as I learn birds to recognize them both by sight and by song. And it's almost like I'm trading my geology degree for a degree in ornithology. I'm developing a new skill in photography. And I should mention that all the photos you're going to see, I took with a couple of minor exceptions, and I'll try to remember to point those out. And last but not least, you don't expect to make new friends at my advanced age, but it's amazing how people bond over birds. So over the last couple of years with the pandemic, there's been an explosion of interest in my favorite hobby of birding. When everybody's recreational activity was shut down, even if it was just watching professional sports on TV, everything was closed. People started to look out the windows and pay more attention to nature around them and realize there was a great entertainment for free right there. And there's always been lots of books and studies and anecdotes about birding and nature in general as being very good for your mental health, very soothing and calming. But somewhere in my global travels, I must have come across a tick that was infected, and I contracted Lyme disease, which is why I ended up retiring in 2015. And I very quickly discovered that birding was really therapeutic. It took my mind off my ailing body. So shameless promotion, I wrote a book about birding as therapy for physical health, not mental health, but I wrote it for myself. It was just cathartic to journalize what I went through. But on a whim, I sent it to a few publishers, and I'm still in shock that a house in Vancouver agreed to publish it. And it has been a bit delayed because of the pandemic. But I was just speaking to my publisher yesterday, and everything's back online. And he tells me I'm going to be very busy in the next couple of months dealing with the editor, the designer, and they're targeting sometime in next year, early 2022 for publication. So this is just a mock-up of what the cover might look like. I came up with this concept of combining my birding and Lyme with a tick. So my daughter's an artist, and she captured it perfectly with this eastern bluebird stomping on an oversized tick. So hopefully the cover will look something like this. The editor loved the concept, so we'll see. Now, I'm going to digress for a second. I realize you're here for the birds, but I have so many birding friends that are very uptight about catching line. And you don't want to get it, believe me. And I probably shouldn't be preaching because I'm obviously no expert in how to avoid line, but I don't want your fear of line to ruin your love of nature and getting out there and birding. So some very simple precautions, stay out of the tall grass because that's where the ticks are. Tuck your pants into your socks. And when you get home, do a thorough body check. And I don't know if you can read the caption in this slide, but it's essentially a young couple out for a walk. And when we get back to the cabin, we're going to open champagne and then we'll check each other for ticks. And, my son's probably rolling his eyes at this point because he knows what's coming, a really corny dad joke, but this gives a new meaning to the word romantic. And just please don't forget that not every insect bite you get is a tick bite. And not every tick is the ones that carry Lyme, the black-legged deer tick. And not every deer tick is, and enjoy our hobby. So why is birding so excellent in this area? Here we are at the west end of Lake Ontario. Well, first off, we're blessed with a number of great habitats. We have lush Carolinian forest. We have farmland, and then we've got the contact between the forest and the farmland. We have marshes and swamps, and we've got the Great Lakes. And the more habitats, the more species of birds you're going to get. But I have another little personal pet theory. And what I've shown here is spring migration with the arrows northbound. You could turn them around, put them on the other side of the lakes to reflect what's going on right now with fall migration. But essentially, birds try to avoid crossing big bodies of water if they can help it. And so if you look at Lake Erie, there's two shortcuts that they see from the air. And lo and behold, Point Pelee and Long Point are two of the best places, not only in Ontario and Canada, but in the world for birding. So the birds utilize those. The first point of land they see, they land at, and you get a lot of great birds concentrated in a tiny area. But we get a bit of that where birds do cross Lake Ontario and they hit places like La Salle Marina. It's a nice little wood lot, so they get concentrated. But my theory is what happens as well is the birds hit Lake Ontario and you see there's no shortcut. There's no equivalent to Lake Erie. So I think they use the Niagara Peninsula as an isthmus to get around. So sitting here, we end up with birds that have been funneled around the lake and that have crossed over. So we get a double concentration during migration. But that's just my theory. As the birds go north in the spring, they follow what's called the green wave. And that's essentially as the trees leaf out. They just follow the leaf out going north. And accompanying that leaf out is an explosion of protein. And by that, I mean the billions of insects that are hatching. And that's what they're feeding on. In the fall, they probably take a different route, probably a little bit more direct south. So birding, because this is for Burlington Green, I prepared this map for birding in Burlington. These are some of the most popular spots in the area. You see La Salle Marina there, which I'll be talking about a lot. And I do want to mention that I have a number of slides where there's a lot of information that you may want to retain. Don't panic if you're trying to take notes. Kelly is going to email like a handout to all the participants after the talk. So you'll get these slides in a handout. So again, here's some great spots around Hamilton and over into Oakville, but I'm not going to dwell on this. You'll get this in your hand. So I thought rather than just sort of mindlessly go through groups of birds, it would be more informative to tell you what birds you can expect at what time of the year. So it's sort of what I call the rhythm of the seasons. And I've broken it down into 4 main categories. One are the birds that are here year round. So these are our resident birds. They don't migrate, they're here. 2 are winter visitors that have come from further north. And for whatever crazy reason, they think we're the deep south and they come and they stay here for the winter. 3 are the group that you'll be most familiar with, the summer breeders. These are the ones that come up, they're singing to claim a territory and find a mate, and they're raising a family. This is when you're outdoors, so you're most familiar with the summer breeders. And 4th, which is going on right now, is the migrants that unfortunately, we only get to see them in the spring and fall. They go further north to breed, anywhere from the boreal forest right up to the high Arctic, and they go further south for the winter. So they just pass through here. And like any data set that you try to pigeonhole, there's always going to be exceptions and overlap. Nothing ever fits neatly. And then because we're on the Great Lakes, I want to do a special section on waterfowl. So starting with the first category of our year-round residents, this includes lots of songbirds, like from left to right here, our northern cardinal, our cedar waxwings, American goldfinch, and our blue jays. And the blue jay was the winner in the popularity contest. It also includes mourning doves. We have several species of woodpeckers that are here year-round, and raptors. Raptors are birds of prey like hawks, falcons, and owls. And we also have wild turkeys year-round. Starting with black-capped chickadees. Now, if you're wondering, oh man, he's going to talk about birds I know a lot about already. I'm very familiar with them. My intent is to try to convey maybe a tidbit or two that you may or may not know. So one thing about black-capped chickadees is that they are cavity nesters. They don't build a conventional nest. They'll find a hole in a tree, often a woodpecker hole, and they'll line that and make that their nest. And the other thing is they are very good at stashing seeds. They can stash up to 1,000 seeds a day in the summer, so up to 80,000 seeds over the season. And they remember where they are. I can't even remember where I leave my car keys. So, if anybody thinks they're insulting you by calling you a bird brain, you take it as a compliment. Birds are amazing. Tufted titmice are related to chickadees. They're in a family. I don't really like when people call birds cute and adorable, but these guys really are. If you were to draw the ultimate cute cartoon bird, I think it would be the titmouse. We're really on the northern edge of their range, but with climate change, they seem to be settling in here and moving further north. Over the years, there's been one or two sighted Atlas Owl Marina Park. There are a number around the Dundas Valley, and I even had one at my feeders here in Ancaster this past winter, and I was so shocked to see it. I didn't even grab for my camera, I just stared at it. Blue jays are one of the exceptions. They're here year-round, but they also migrate, and most of them migrate. So it seems like what they do is they do a shuffle south across North America, down North America. So in other words, the individual birds that you're seeing here in the winter aren't necessarily the same individual birds you're seeing in the summer. So maybe the ones from Timmins come here and ours go down to Georgia, they shuffle. Blue jays are in the corvid family with crows and ravens. Some of these birds are considered the most intelligent in the world, have been rated right up there even with dolphins and primates. For example, blue jays have what's called a sense of mind, and essentially means I know what you know. So if a blue jay is stashing a seed, for example, and he sees somebody else is watching him stash it, he'll sneak back and move that seed later. So they're very, very clever. Cardinals, everybody loves the male cardinal. My personal opinion, the female with her dusty rose color is even more beautiful. You typically think of songbirds as the males singing, but in actual fact, ornithologists are finding more and more species, the females will sing as well. So with the cardinals, the females do sing, and in the spring when they're courting, they will actually duet back and forth. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen another thing they'll do for bonding is they'll back and forth. And but it's not all marital harmony and bliss, because I love this picture. It looks like they're having a little tiff, and he's turned away. I'm not talking to you. Most birds go through at least one molt a year. Typically done after breeding when it's still warm, because obviously it impedes on their ability to stay warm and to fly. And for some reason, some birds lose all the feathers off their head at once. So this cardinal's looking pretty pathetic, and then I found this cartoon that it makes you wonder whether birds are conscious of having a bad, cognizant of having a bad hair day. We have a few wrens. The Carolina wren is here year-round. I am convinced they are the loudest animal on the planet per gram of body mass. They're just so loud. Wrens are small and feisty and have attitude, But these guys have a song that sounds like tea kettle, and it just comes blasting out. We have two species of nuthatch. This is a composite shot. The larger of the two is the white-breasted on the left, and smaller is the red-breasted on the right. Very classic pose. You see them on tree trunks with their heads down like this, foraging for insects or whatever they can find under the bark. If you get tuned into their call, it sounds like a very nasal yank, 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 and you'll often hear them before you see them. Though the white-breasted can be very tame. I've seen people hand feeding them in parks. And the word hatch is derived from an old German word for hack, and that refers to how they can hack into seed. American goldfinch, this is a male. The males are this bright canary yellow. In the winter, they dull down to a silvery gray when they're in non-breeding plumage. They look more like the females. Their favorite food is seeds like from thistles, and this is my garden with brown-eyed Susans. If you have a Niger feeder, they love Niger seed. But because their favorite foods are not really ripe until August, unlike most songbirds that do their breeding in June and July when there's tons of insects around, goldfinch will delay their breeding into August. So there's plenty of food for the kids. Cedar waxwings, I love. I think they're one of our more elegant birds. They look like they're wearing a tuxedo. They're very gregarious. You see them in flocks of typically maybe 8 to 20, but even more this past winter. I counted over 300 in a couple of trees here in Ancaster. And these roving flocks are quite nomadic. They move around looking for fruit. They love ripe fruit. So again, like the goldfinch, because the fruit isn't ripe till August, the waxwings also will defer their breeding into August. Housefinch is a pretty little songbird that's here year round. The females don't have the pink, they're a browny gray, but they're not actually native to here. They're a West Coast bird from basically California down through Mexico. But what happened was they were being sold as cage birds in New York City, and the authorities trade in 1939, and the vendors opened the cages and released them, and they've propagated across North America. They spread very quickly. So those are some of our year-round songbirds. Some of other birds that are here year-round are mourning doves. You could be forgiven for thinking that it's morning as in good morning, because they certainly do start up cooing very early, but it's morning to reflect the fact that cooing is quite sad and forlorn. We have a few species of woodpeckers here year-round. The most common and the smallest is the downy, another composite shot. The male on the left, he's got the little red patch on the back of his head. You see the female here lacks that. Much larger woodpecker that's here year-round is the red-bellied woodpecker, and I always get asked the very obvious question, why in the world is it not called red-headed? And you can see it's a real stretch to call it red-bellied. There's just hardly a tinge. Some of them have a bit more, but there was already a red-headed woodpecker named. So you'll find that a lot of bird names seem to be rather inappropriate. Pileated woodpecker is the largest woodpecker in North America. They're about the size of a crow, and they have a really raucous call. That was the inspiration for Woody the woodpecker. Very easy to separate the males from the females. This stripe here is red. You can see on the male, and on the female, it's black. In terms of raptors that are here year-round, probably our most common is the red tail. I'm sure people have seen them along the sides of highways, sitting on wires and on poles. But be warned, they're not all so obviously red-tailed and reddish like this one that I saw at Princess Point in Hamilton. They can, depending on the age and just variants, they can be a softer, more chocolate brown. But the key sort of field mark to identify them is what we call a belly band. This patch of darker feathers on their lower belly. A smaller, more nimble hawk, more of a forest hawk, is the Coopers. And these guys will stalk bird feeders. So every now and then I'll look out and I'll see in my feeders, all of a sudden the birds are all playing the kids' game of statue, and they're all frozen and they're not even batting an eye. And invariably, if I look up, way up, I'll find a Cooper's hawk is sitting up above the feeders. And if this goes on for day after day, sometimes you just have to bring your feeders in until the Cooper's gives up and moves on. Bring them in for a few days. Falcons are smaller than hawks. They're very, very fast. The peregrine falcon was close to extinction. It's been a marvelous comeback story. In fact, it's a success story right here in Hamilton. They were started to breed on a ledge at the Sheraton Hotel. There's even a webcam that you can watch the babies being raised. They also breed at the lift bridge and at the big quarry in Salt Fleet above Stony Creek. They are the fastest animal in the world. When they're in a dive after prey, they've been clocked at up to 390 kilometers an hour. I know one guy that refers to them as sky Lamborghinis. The American kestrel used to be called the sparrowhawk, but it's not a hawk. It's also a falcon, very colorful, roughly the size. This guy hung out at Bayfront Park in Hamilton last December for about a week and gave a lot of us incredible views, just beautiful little falcon. And then we come to owls. And, I don't know if it was Harry Potter or what, but everybody loves owls. And I'm forever asked how in the world you see an owl. I never see an owl. And I have a pat answer that if you ever gone for a walk through a park with big mature trees or even a cemetery, I guarantee you've walked right by an owl. They're the masters of disguise. And oh, by the way, this is one picture that's not mine. I stole this off the internet. So a few tips for finding them. One, crows and chickadees really go ballistic if there's an owl around. It's called mobbing, and crows will if you hear crows cawing nonstop. Last year I was at Sedgwick Forest in Oakville, and I could hear two crows going crazy, and I looked up and I spotted them, and they were in two trees on opposite side of a big white pine, but they were both looking in towards the white pine. So I scanned the top of it very carefully with my binoculars, and lo and behold, there was a great horned owl sitting up there. And I would never have seen him in 1,000 years if it hadn't been for the crows. And like I say, chickadees, if you hear the more D-D-D-Ds, they're really emphatic. There's maybe like a saw-whet owl around. You look for these pellets, especially if there's fresh snow, the pellets will really stand out under the trees. Because the owls can't digest all the body parts of a mouse or a vole, they form this pellet that they'll spit up a few hours after they eat, and it's full of the bones and the fur. And then the other thing you do is you look for, it's a nice euphemism for poop whitewash. So if you have an owl or several owls in the winter, they'll often roost in the same tree for a long time, and eventually the tree can get coated with the whitewash. And the other thing is just watch for lumps on branches. They typically, especially great horns, will sit on a horizontal branch very close to the trunk. So you'll see a lump. Owls have an amazing sense. If our eyes were as big as theirs in proportion to our skull, this is how big our eyes would be. And the other thing is their hearing. Their ears are actually asymmetrical. One is higher than the other on their side. And it allows them to more or less hear in 3D. And this is how they can pinpoint a mouse in the dark or even under snow where they can't see it, but they know exactly where it is from their incredible hearing. So eastern screech owls are one of our common owls around here. If you're out at night, they sound like a horse. You hear a whinnying sound. Screech owls can be either red or gray. These variants are called morphs. And so this is a red morph. And the red screech owls tend to roost in trees with redwood. And look at this, the gray ones are in trees with graywood. And you can walk right by this guy. Great horned owls are your original hoot owl. These big tufts, a lot of people call them ears. These are not ears, these are just a tufts of feathers. Their ears are down on their sides of their head. It helps them camouflage. Disguise look like branches. Here's a great horned owl with her two young in a nest in Burlington from a couple of years ago. Barred owls are around the Dundas Valley, and I encourage you to Google it afterwards. You can hear their call. It sounds exactly like they're saying, who cooks for you? And a very interesting thing, if you notice this, what makes this barred owl different than the other owls, these guys have black eyes, and the other owls all have yellow eyes. And to me, it makes them look wiser and more mysterious. And then we have wild turkeys. Wild turkeys were extirpated, which essentially means locally extinct in Ontario. They were reintroduced in 1984. They've made a great comeback to the point where I believe there's now a hunting season for them. And occasionally I get them coming to my feeders as the cleanup crew. They'll clean up seeds that have been knocked down by other birds. So these were all hens and young ones. I had about a dozen. And then all of a sudden one day, in came the big male tom turkey. And that's a face only a mother could love. And my cat Loshik, he loves to watch the birds out the window with me, but he was not used to seeing a bird that was way bigger than him. And he turned and gave me a look like, what the, he was just mesmerized. It's bigger than me. Okay, so those are some birds that you can expect to see at any time of the year. And so now we'll talk about ones that come here for their winter vacation. And it includes a few sparrows, including this American snow buntings and quite a few winter finch. Dark-eyed juncos are actually a sparrow. They're a really good indicator and reminder that winter is coming. They typically arrive here mid to late September. And please don't shoot the messenger, but I saw my first one this morning. So the winter is indeed coming, sorry. White-throated sparrows are a beautiful sparrow. And again, I saw my first flock of these this morning, about a dozen of them. They have a beautiful song. To a Canadian, it really sounds like they're singing Sweet Canada, Canada, Canada. But Americans who aren't familiar with our anthem, they claim, and this is in your field guides, they're singing Sam Peabody, Sam Peabody. So now the winter finch. Winter finch includes this common redpoll, but also pine grosbeaks, evening grosbeaks, birds called crossbills, and pine siskins. So these are birds of the boreal forest that like to eat seeds from birch keys or the seeds from pine and spruce cones. But periodically, there's a bad crop of cones. And so these birds get pushed further south in the winter. So normally they come out of their range. So normally you might have to go as far as at least Algonquin Park to see, for example, this common redpoll. This past winter was absolutely epic. There were redpolls and evening grosbeaks in Central Park in New York, right down into the mid-US. I never dreamt I'd have redpolls in my backyard. I had 40 for several months. A poll is an old British word for cap. So this is a bird with a good name. But it really was an epic year. When they come out of their range like that, it's called an eruption. And that's not eruption, it's IRR eruption. Okay, so that brings us to our main category, which is the summer breeders. Like I said, you're probably most familiar with them, including this tree swallow. So we have lots of sparrows. I'm only going to show two for the sake of time. Beginning birders find sparrows very challenging. They all look the same. But in actual fact, there's one very simple field ID that you can key on, at least breaks them into two categories that you can narrow them down. And that is the presence or absence of streaking on their breast. So the song sparrow has this brown streaking on its breast. The little chipping sparrow, you can see, doesn't. And chipping sparrows are very common. They have a lovely rising trill song, and there are lots of them around my neighborhood singing in the spring. Red-winged blackbirds are probably the first songbird that comes back in the winter. These are really the true harbinger of spring. They're back as early as late February into early March. And when I hear that first conqueree, I think, yes, there's hope. Winter's going to end. This is the female. A lot of female birds are much duller than their mates for obvious reasons. They're sitting on nests and raising young. And it's often been said that the female red-winged blackbird has been the most misidentified bird in North America for obvious reasons. You'd never know who her husband is. Common grackles are another bird in the blackbird family. I only threw it in because they look grumpy. They look like the kid's angry bird. But in actual fact, the blue heads can be iridescent and really pretty. Brown-headed cowbirds are a small blackbird with a really interesting reproductive strategy that they've evolved. They're called nest parasites. They do not make a nest, and most songbirds might lay 4 to 8 eggs once or twice a season. Cowbirds will lay up to 40 single eggs and 40 different nests of other birds. So they lay an egg and basically abandon it and let the surrogate parent raise their baby. The thinking is this evolved on the prairies when these birds were following buffalo. The cows were actually buffalo, and they were eating insects that the buffalo stirred up as they went around. And because the buffalo were moving around a lot, the birds didn't have a fixed address, so they didn't stay home long enough to have a nest. So anyway, it works because their youngsters tend to be bigger than the surrogate babies, and they tend to hatch earlier. So they'll often smother the eggs or the surrogate's babies, or even kick them out of the nest. So nature can be cruel, but it works. And here's a classic example. So here's a little chipping sparrow feeding its baby cowbird at my feeders. You can see how much bigger the baby is than the mother. Our most beautiful member of the blackbird family is the Baltimore Oriole. I'm sad to say that the last one left my yard on September 9th, and won't be back until about May 3rd. Anybody my age might remember my favorite tree as a kid was a creamsicle. And to me, these guys are like a creamsicle on wings. We have a few vireos. Vireos are small insect eaters. They typically have a little hook on the end of their beak. The red-eyed is well named. Most songbirds, you think they sing typically when they're staking out territory, finding a mate in the spring, and then they take the summer off, and they only sing in the morning. Red-eyed vireos sing from dawn till dusk, from May till they're still singing now. They're incessant singers. They're up at the top of the treetops. It sounds like something like, here I am, look up of the treetop. And a Canadian ornithologist who clearly had nothing better to do sat one day and counted one vireo sang 22,300 songs in one day. So very impressive. We've already seen the red-winged blackbird. Now here's a black-winged redbird. And it's not even red, it is scarlet. Scarlet tannards are just spectacular birds. They are around the Dundas Valley if you're lucky enough to see one. The females are yellow, and the males, when they go into non-breeding plumage, also turn yellow and end up looking much like the females. I saw one yesterday right by my yard here. Rose-breasted grosbeaks are related to cardinals. What I find interesting with these guys is that they come back in the spring about the same time as the orioles, and they come to my feeders. But then after about a week or 10 days, they disappear. And you'd almost think they'd moved on further north, but they didn't. They just went into the forest. And it seems like they utilize feeders to sort of recover from migration, regain back the weight they've lost. But then they'd rather get natural food, especially when they're raising their family, and they just stop coming to the feeders. Indigo buntings are just breathtaking color. But what I find fascinating with them is there's no blue pigment. Excuse me. Birds that are orange or yellow or even green, a combination of colors, they get that coloring, and it's derived from pigments from their diet. I have to get some water. Sorry. There's no blue pigment. This coloring is a structural feature of their feathers. It's a way they preferentially refract blue light. We have a few members of the thrush family. The most common is the American robin. And I just want to take this opportunity to backtrack a bit. And you might recall, I've already mentioned the American goldfinch, the American kestrel. Here's the American robin. And we have lots of other American birds. And the reason for this is the early settlers in pioneers that first came over, mostly from the UK, they would see when they settled in North America, they would see birds that reminded them of home. So they'd give them the same name and then slap on American for North American. So we have our American robin, and in actual fact, it's not even closely related to the European robin. One of the most beautiful members of the thrush family is the eastern bluebird, and one of my friends there said that was her favorite bird. These are birds of fields and forest edges. They are cavity nesters, so they really appreciate when housing boxes, nesting boxes are put up for them. My favorite of the thrush is the wood thrush. I just love the markings on them, but most importantly, they have, in my opinion, the most beautiful song in the world. The bird's equivalent to our voice box is called the syrinx, and it's actually Y-shaped. And a wood thrush can sing a different note on each side simultaneously, and then essentially harmonize with itself. So it ends up with this beautiful flute-like song. And when Hollywood wants a nice bird song on a movie track, invariably they'll use a wood thrush, but they clearly never consult a birder or an ornithologist, because they'll slap it in on a bird singing at night or in Saudi Arabia or somewhere where they don't live. We have several birds that are what's called the mimic family, the imitators. And probably the best known is the northern mockingbird, but the most common here is the gray catbird. And they do indeed meow. One of their calls is a meow. But most birds, their song is 2 to 4 neat notes, and then they maybe repeat. If you hear a bird with like a run-on sentence, it just goes on and on and on and on, and very squeaky, it could be a catbird. And interesting for me is they're the only bird that comes to my feeder and competes with the orioles for the grape jelly. Now, warblers, there's about 35 or so species of warblers that you could see in Ontario. Most birders, especially me, love warblers more than any other birds. They're smaller than chickadees. They're absolutely stunningly gorgeous, and they're very hyperactive. You're not going to see them at the feeders. They're insect eaters, primarily insect eaters. Most of my favorites we only see in migration. I'll just show you a couple that do stay here and breed. The yellow warbler, beautiful. The males have these orange tiger stripes. Common yellowthroat, I call it the little warbler. You'll see these guys around wetter areas, marshy areas, and you might hear the sort of a witchety call. The northern flicker is a bird that a lot of people don't realize is a woodpecker, and that's because they see it on the ground. And the reason it's on the ground is because its favorite food is ants. And that's probably why it's not here year-round, that they migrate, because once the ground's frozen, they've lost access to the ants. This is a male, the females lack the mustache. A great field mark, if you see a bird flicker flying, they have a very large white patch on their rump. So it's very, very obvious when they're flying away from you. We have several herons that visit us. Most people know the great blue heron, so I won't touch on it. I'll show you the 2 smaller relatives. This green heron, I just happened to catch him in a big floof. But these birds are really cool because they're one of the few in the world that uses tools. They will take a feather or a seed or a twig or something and drop it in the water and try to lure little fish up to check it out, and then bang, they catch the fish. Black-crowned night herons, to me, they kind of look sinister because they're always hunched over, but they do indeed have a long heron-like neck they can stretch out. And a really great place to see them, especially right now this time of year, is at the canal in Dundas. That's where this photo is taken. One of our raptors that migrates is the osprey or fishhawk. And of course, it has to migrate because the lakes and rivers freeze over and it loses access to its food. They make big stick nests on top of platforms, and you'll occasionally see a big platform put up with Ontario Hydro on it that they'll utilize. And then the last of the birds I want to talk about in this category is the turkey vulture. This is another face only a mother could love. And they've gained evolution as they've lost the feathers off their heads because they're usually immersed in a body cavity of a dead animal. And these guys do us a great service, cleaning up and removing potential infections from dead carcasses. So then fourth and last are the transients, ones we only see in the spring or fall. And examples are, this is a flock of tundra swans heading north. We also get big flocks of sandhill cranes. And then we get some sparrows, and as I mentioned, many beautiful warblers. For the kinglets, we have two species, ruby-crowned and golden-crowned. They're very tiny. You can see for scale a chain-link fence. They're very hyperactive. It's been joked that trying to take a picture of a kinglet is like shooting popcorn, which is zing, zing, zing as they're chasing insects. I heard my first golden crowned kinglet yesterday. He was way up high, I could just barely see him. One of our sparrows that we typically see on migration is this beautiful white crowned, but again, they're a bit of an exception because I found a place near the Hamilton airport where they were overwintering this past year. My favorite sparrow, the fox sparrow, I just love the patterns on them. They're a large, chunky sparrow, and I was just getting this guy nicely framed up when I got photobombed by the cardinal. I guess he was trying to get that extra vote to win the poll. And then when we come to the warblers, I'm only going to show a couple reluctantly. I'd love to show you like 20 of them. Blackburnian, nicknamed the flame throat. And again, remember these guys are smaller than chickadees. They don't look like this time of year. This is a male in breeding plumage. Now in the fall, they've gone into non-breeding plumage, and so they've dulled right down, much blander. And it's even been said that male birds in the spring are dressed to kill, and in the fall, they're dressed to chill. It's like they've given up their prom tuxedo and they've gone into sweats. Another gorgeous warbler here is the magnolia. I took this guy up near our cottage near Sault Ste. Marie. I'm seeing them right now on Dundas Valley. They don't look like this. They've lost these black stripes, are now just dull gray. But here's an example of a bird with an inappropriate name. They breed in the boreal forests and they all go to southern Mexico. They don't live anywhere near a magnolia tree. But the first one identified by an ornithologist was somewhere in the mid-US in a magnolia. Okay, and then lastly, the waterfowl. I've taken all these pictures around Hamilton, Burlington. I'm not going to dwell on these ones. I just wanted to show you the wonderful variety of ducks we get to see, especially in the winter. We're really lucky having the Lake Ontario here. A lot of our common ducks can be divided into two main categories, dabbling ducks and diving ducks. The dabbling ones are like this mallard. They're the ones that are upside, their head down and their bum up in the air, the way they feed. I mean, yes, mallards are common, but look at that coloring, the iridescent. And I took this at LaSalle, and I would just like to remind people there's a big sign at LaSalle saying, please don't feed the waterfowl bread. People ignore it and do so. There's zero nutritional value in the bread for them, but it fills them up. And then they don't eat what they should be eating. And at the same time, the bread that doesn't get eating gets moldy, can cause an algal bloom and make the critters sick. So please obey the signs. Another dabbling duck, I call the wood duck the paint by number duck. And we're really lucky because often in the winter, there will be one or two wood ducks around LaSalle. One of our diving ducks at LaSalle, and if you want really great entertainment, you go in March and watch when the males start their breeding antics, when they're trying to seduce a female. They throw their head right back in the water. So here's the crown of his head, and their bill straight up in the air. And they end up creating this illusion of being a water rabbit. And I hope everybody can see that, but they look like a rabbit with, this would be his nose. Hooded merganser, we have a few mergansers. People have called mergansers sawbill ducks because unlike our regular ducks, they have a serrated bill, which allows them to grasp fish. The hooded merganser, they don't always have the hood erected like that. It can be just flat to their skull. And then finally, we have a few swans. The most common swan here is the mute swan with the orange bill. These are not native. They were introduced. The native swan is the trumpeter swan with black bill. These guys were really going extinct. I think in 1935, there was something like 69 known trumpeter swans in North America. And then a flock was found previously unknown in Alaska. And that's when the light bulb went off and the conservationists, and they thought, we need to protect them. You can see these guys are tagged. And after a lot of great work, there's now about 1,000 residing in Ontario, and we get about 200 of them that spend the winter at LaSalle along the beach there. They really are well named. They sound like a marching band when they start trumpeting. So now, a little digression. Kelly and I are both on a committee working to get Hamilton and Burlington certified as bird-friendly cities. This designation is granted by Nature Canada, one of our oldest conservation charities, and they've already designated or certified Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and London. It would be a great badge of honor and a source of pride if we could do it. It decrees what the city, what bylaws, and what the city has to do to make our birds safer. And our birds do need our help. Over the last 50 years, in North America, we've lost about 25% of our birds, meaning there are about 3 billion fewer birds than when I was a young teenager, individual birds. And much of this loss is our own fault. From destruction of habitat and use of pesticides to colliding with buildings and power lines and cars and predation by cats. So, oops. Bear with me here. So what can you do as an individual to help? I mean, cities can pass bylaws. They can decree lights out on towers at night, especially during migration, or design buildings better with less reflective glass so that the birds aren't flying into them. Well, first off, you can feed your backyard birds. You can plant native species. You can write, if in the audience, if you are a resident of Hamilton or Burlington, I would really beg you to write your counselor with the Bird Friendly City. The committee has created a template, and you can personalize it and then send it. And that template, access to it and how to do it is in the handout that Kelly's going to send you. So we would really appreciate your support in doing that. And then pardon the pun, my pet peeve is keep your cat indoors. In fact, in Hamilton and Burlington, it is illegal. Your cat is not meant to roam beyond your yard. Our birds did not evolve any wits to escape cats. Our cats are not native. They were brought in by the first settlers in the ships to protect their grain stores from mice and rats. And the statistics are appalling. Free roaming and feral cats account for 75% of all bird deaths in Canada, 200 million birds. And in the States, it's like 2.5 billion birds, unnecessary deaths. And it's better for your cat to stay indoors. Indoor cats on average live 14 years. Cats outdoors, and this is probably more just pure feral cats, but outdoor cats 2 to 5 years. And most appalling, this should really scare you, is that last statistic on the fact that urban coyotes really like a diet of cats. So keep your cat indoors, save your cat, and save our birds. Thank you. That's the end of my lecture on that. So feeding the birds. It used to be called bird feeders. I call it a feeding station because different birds have different types of food they prefer, and they have different feeding habits. Some like to be cling, some like to be on a platform, some like to be in the ground. One thing in common that you want is a baffle like this, because that will prevent the squirrels and raccoons from shinnying up the pole and cleaning out your feeders and your wallet. I just want to mention here that, in this day and age of social media, there seems to always be trolls around that want to take up an argument on anything, and even something as simple as birding or as bird feeding. So I'll hear comments like, well, you shouldn't be feeding the birds in your backyard because you're habituating them and they're not going to migrate. You're preventing them from migrating. Well, first off, migration's triggered by the length of daylight. They're going to go when they're ready to go. And second off, Cornell Lab of Ornithology now is even thinking that birds at your feeders that have had an opportunity to top up the tank may even take advantage of that to migrate a day or two earlier because they've got the energy to go. And even the birds that you see at your feeders every day are only taking about 50% of their diet from your feeders. They will get at least 50% out in the forest of natural food. Even gulls at a dump that are eating garbage know enough, somehow they don't take the garbage to their kids. They'll go and catch a fish and feed their kids. So feeding the birds, Baltimore Orioles, they love grape jelly. I guess they're like humans and get a sugar fix, and they love oranges. You can get specialized feeders like this at Wild Birds Unlimited. There's a store in Burlington. Birds like to feed on a platform. I really like this concept of a dinner bell because the cover keeps the seed dry and from going moldy. And at the same time, if you are being annoyed by pigeons or big flocks of grackles that you really can't afford to feed, you can regulate that height so just the small songbirds can get in. I find all of the birds love these seed cylinders. You can buy different kinds of seed cylinders. Some will have mealworms and different things in them, but they all seem to really like a seed cylinder. And here's that red-breasted nuthatch in that classic head down pose I talked about. I mentioned goldfinch really like Niger seed, so you can get these tubes that feed them. And we talked about the molt. So here's 3 male American goldfinch coming out of their non-breeding plumage and molting in the bright yellow, and you can see the black cap coming in. So bringing in their summer breeding plumage. Suet feeders, I only put suet out in the winter. In the summer, it's just too hot and it turns into a rancid goo. Most suet feeders just end here. I like this one with the long paddle because bigger woodpeckers can brace their tail a little bit better. You can get these little clingers only feeders. So the bigger birds they burn too much energy, flapping their wings, so they just can't get onto it. So if you want to be selective in who you're feeding, these are the winter finch pine siskins, but the chickadees can land on this and the nuthatches. You can get little peanut trays and a nice little roof over it. So this little Carolina wren feels as snug as a bug here, nice and safe. And then there's hummingbirds. And why do you want to feed them? These guys are awesome. Their wings or their heart is 1,200 beats a minute when they're feeding down to about 250 when they're resting. And then their wings are going 53 times a second. So they need to consume half their body weight every day. And if we did that, we'd have to consume 155,000 calories. So, you should feed them and help them out, but don't buy the colored nectar they sell in grocery stores and other places. That's just food dye. It's not good for them. And it's cheaper anyway to just make your own. You boil the water. Once it's cooled, it's 4 parts water, 1 part white sugar. Stir it well, keep it in the fridge. And then clean and change your feeder frequently when it's really hot and muggy because you don't want it going off and making the bird sick. And then the difference from males and females, the males have this beautiful red gorget called, and the females are lacking that. And then the other thing you put out for your birds is a bird bath. And not only do they drink in it, but they do come and they have a bath. And if you want entertainment, the sheer exuberance of a bird having a bath, it's just hilarious. They get in there, and this starling knocked half the water out, and he was having so much fun by the looks of it. And just as an aside, European starlings, as the name suggests, were introduced. A guy, for whatever crazy reason, thought it would be brilliant to have all the birds of Shakespeare in North America. So in 1890, he released 60 starlings into Central Park in New York, and the rest is his history. So a number of resources. This is in your handout that Kelly's going to email you, so you can get, and I wrote up a bit of a description each one. But I do want to give a little shout out to 3 local groups run by friends that do a great job. The Pipits, I know Colleen Riley's online here. Colleen, it's a nature group that focuses on birding, and they have weekly field trips, and during the pandemic, that's Zoom meetings, but Colleen makes it a lot of fun and very informative. And on Facebook, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of bird and nature groups and bird photography groups, but 2 that really stand out. Again, I know Barb Canny is on here, and Barb does a great job with birds, blooms, beast bugs, and butterflies, or B5 for short. It's a very global group. Barb has grown it from when I've known her, like about 300 people to around 8,000. And because it's so international, you'll learn a lot about all of these topics from all over the world. And Bill McDonald, a good friend of mine, is a fantastic photographer, and his group is more focused on photographic skills. And on his site, you're going to see Audubon quality shots, National Geographic shots. If you find a bird that's run into your window and you don't know what to do with it, or you want to prevent it happening again, you can follow these links from your handouts. So the information is there. So that's basically, I'm winding up. Kelly, I've probably gone on way too long, but yes, it is a legitimate hobby. And believe me, it is really good for your mental health and physical health. When I am out birding, I do not feel my aching body. I'm in the zone. So don't hesitate to contact me if you have a bird ID question. If I can't help, I can find somebody that can. Or if you want to contact or contribute to our Bird Friendly City Committee, again, this is in your handout. I know I've conveyed a fair bit in a very short order, but I hope if you have one takeaway, it's that you have a new or an enhanced appreciation for the fantastic birds that we're so lucky to have surrounding us. So again, Kelly, thank you personally for all your help, and thank you, Burlington Green. And as we say, good birding. Thank you.
That was amazing, Bob. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'd say you're right on time with the presentation. We're just a few minutes over 8 o'clock, and we have first. Thank you so much. I mean, I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody here enjoyed it as well. We did have a question come through. And I'm not surprised that it came through. I expected something about photography because you've showed us some wonderful photos. Rick wanted to know, what camera lens would you recommend for birding?
It really depends on how much you want to get into it. Actually, this is great, Kelly, because you got my picture. You can see my camera. I use what's called a bridge camera. So it's somewhere between a simple point and shoot and a real camera with interchangeable lenses. This is called the Nikon Coolpix. It's a P1000. It's got an incredible zoom, and that's what I use for all these pictures. I mean, it's certainly not as good as what you want to consider a real camera where you do all the settings yourself. This thing can go completely automated, but it's good for me. And quite honestly, with my line, I have quite a tremor, and I would never be able to hold a lot of my friends' big cameras steady. I struggle enough with this one. So I really like the Nikon. They make us two smaller models in this, a P900 and a P950, and they're all great cameras, and they're quite affordable.
There was another question that came through from Ali. What are the best times to see birds at LaSalle?
Birding's always best first thing in the morning. Get up with the birds. But in terms of seasons for ducks in the winter is really good. Especially if the outer harbor freezes over and then there's a small patch of open water closer to shore, the ducks get really concentrated in close. And that's when you can really have a lot of fun. But I would say mostly, in the morning, looking for songbirds, through the forest there.
That's great. And Amy had a question. When did you begin birding?
I really only got into it after I retired to Ancaster, and this is a good opportunity to give a shout out to the Hamilton Naturalist Club. They're listed there on your handout as a resource. It's a fantastic club. It's over 100 years old now. And when I first retired, I went on one of their field trips in the spring of 2016. I met two fellows that have become lifelong friends in the last 5 years. They mentored me, took me under their wing, pardon the pun. And that's when I really got into it. In fact, I think I forgot when I talked about the benefits of birding was making, no, maybe I did, making friends. And to bond with a friend over seeing a new bird that you've never seen before, it really is neat. It's hard to describe unless you're really into it. It's very addictive, I gotta warn you.
There was another question from Lynn. Is it safe to feed ducks and swans peas? Or also a question, or seeds?
I really don't know. I think corn is okay. I see people feeding corn, but I don't know.
Okay, thank you. If anyone else has any other questions, throw them out now. Okay, so Jean has a question. What has been the most rare bird you've seen, and how do they come to Ontario?
Well, I can answer the first part, and the second part's a mystery. I would say the rarest was a year ago, and it was called a variegated flycatcher, and it's a bird from Brazil. And it showed up over near Whitby, in a little park in Whitby, and there was a pilgrimage of birders every day to see this thing. How did it end up in North America? I mean, who knows? Did it get caught up in a big storm and just got blown completely off track? Or was there something wrong with its internal GPS, just wasn't working right, and it was, wrong way Oregon, and just got lost? I don't know, but that was a mega rarity to see something from South America up here.
Oh, that's great. Dave is just mentioning in the comments, just as a note, that it's against local bylaws to feed wildlife, including waterfowl, on Hamilton. So that's something good for our audience to know as well.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah. Oh, and Brian wanted to know if you were able to describe the local bird count process. Is that something you know anything about?
I'm not. Can you expand on that question? Because I'm not quite sure what he's asking. Because there's a lot of different bird counts that go on. There's like a Christmas count, and there's e-birding where people keep inventory of birds. So I'm not quite sure what the question is.
Yeah, Brian, if you're referring to a specific bird count, that might help clarify. Let's see.
My friend Steve just pointed out that right now over in Elgin County, there's a very, very rare bird, a swallowtail kite. And I haven't had the opportunity yet to go over to see if I could find it, but I've been seeing spectacular photos of it on Facebook.
And Aaron just asked, we talked about LaSalle, if you have any other suggested locations or parks for birding.
If you can be patient and wait for your handout, there was a number of other spots on the map for Burlington, and then I put probably about 8 or 10 locations in Oakville and in Hamilton.
Yeah, so that was.
If you want more details, more details, email me privately, and I'm glad to help.
Yes, closer to the beginning of his presentation, there was a map and some details, and that will go out in the email, so you'll have that handy as well. So I think Brian was just clarifying about like Christmas bird count, asking how someone participates, if you know.
I think that's done through Birds Canada, which is the federal group based down at Long Point, Port Rowan. And I'm struggling here because I get emails because I'm on all the distribution lists. But I think if you just Google Christmas bird count and Birds Canada, it should come up, and then you can just sign up online, and you'll get instructions on how to do it. And it's just X number of hours per day, and count what you see. But again, if he wants to email me and remind me, I can send him a link. I can find the link and send it.
Yeah, in the comments here, Lynn has said the Hamilton Naturalist Club does lots of bird counts that the public can take part in and around Hamilton. So that would probably be another good avenue to look out if you want to join maybe some other local birders and participate.
Yeah, those ones tend to be a bit more sophisticated than like the backyard counts. Those are more like really getting out and identifying everything in great detail. So yeah, you need to be a bit, sort of an intermediate birder, say. But I mean, everybody's welcome. But I'm just saying, they really get into the nitty gritty.
Oh, of course. Well, I think we'll wrap up the Q&A now. We're about almost at 8:15. So I want to extend my sincerest thanks to Bob for joining us and sharing his knowledge and passion for birding. I know I learned a lot. I think everybody really enjoyed it. So thank you, Bob, so much. Before everybody takes off, I did want to let everyone know about some upcoming events and opportunities happening with Burlington Green right now. This Saturday, September 18th, is actually World Cleanup Day. So you can be part of this international action against litter by signing up to do a local cleanup on the weekend. We have free cleanup supplies, great prizes, and more. We also have National Tree Day coming up next week on September 22nd. And we're celebrating with a special event called Ask an Arborist, and it's at 7 p.m. on September 22nd. So we have a master arborist who will be joining us in answering all your tree-related questions. So we hope you'll join us next week. We have a special giveaway, and everyone attending will have a chance to win a $50 gift card to Connie Nurseries. So hopefully you will join us next week as well. And for any photographers out there, we have an annual tree photo contest. It launches next week. Starting next week, anyone can participate and submit your it's a contest open and welcome to everybody. And then lastly, just right now we have our Make the Switch contest happening, and we want to know what switches you're making in your life to live more softly on the environment. You can find out about all these events and opportunities by visiting our website at burlingtongreen.org. And lastly, please complete our post-event survey. So when you exit tonight, you should get a screen that will give a link to our survey. Your feedback is so important to us, and it helps us improve our experience for future events and activities. It only takes a minute, and we'd really appreciate it if you're able to complete it. And then lastly, today's event was part of our Nature Friendly Burlington program, which is all about making connections between people and local nature stronger. When we connect with nature, we appreciate it and in turn protect it. So thank you to the Burlington Foundation and Nuvo Network for making this program and tonight's event possible. So thanks again to Bob, and thank you to everyone for taking the time and joining us tonight. Burlington Green, we are a registered charity, and your donations fuel the work we do in the community to help Burlington become cleaner, greener, and more environmentally responsible. If you'd like to make a donation, you can do so at burlingtongreen.org. So that's it for tonight. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Bob. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kelly.